January 7, 2026, in a dramatic escalation of U.S. efforts to enforce sanctions and disrupt illicit oil networks, American forces seized two large oil tankers in international waters, one in the North Atlantic near the United Kingdom and the other in the Caribbean Sea. This operation has sent shockwaves through global geopolitics, drawing reactions from world capitals from Washington to Moscow. Our first story starts with a tanker originally known as the Bella One, a vessel long tracked by U.S. authorities for violating sanctions connected to Venezuela and Iran. After evading U.S. Coast Guard efforts in the Caribbean in late December, the ship fled north across the Atlantic, pursued for weeks by U.S. surveillance and naval assets. The vessel changed its name to Marinera and reflagged itself under Russia in an apparent attempt to avoid capture. U.S. officials, however, declared it stateless after flying false flags, clearing the way for a legal seizure under a U.S. federal court warrant. Off the waters between Iceland and the United Kingdom, U.S. Special Forces and Coast Guard units closed in. Supported by British RAF surveillance and Royal Fleet Auxiliary logistics, U.S. helicopters and special operations teams boarded the tanker without resistance and took control of the ship. The operation concluded swiftly, an unmistakable show of American maritime power. This was an unprecedented high-seas operation involving international coordination and real-time intelligence, underscoring the scale of what the U.S. calls its campaign against shadow fleet oil tankers.
The UK has provided enabling support, the Ministry of Defence is saying, to the United States at their request to interdict the vessel Bella One today. UK armed forces provided pre-planned operational support, including basing to US military assets, interdicting the Bella One in the UK-Iceland-Greenland gap, following a US request for assistance. RFA Tide Force provided support for US forces pursuing and interdicting the Bella One, while the RAF provided surveillance support from the air.
Meanwhile, in the Caribbean Sea, another tanker, the MT Sophia, was moving through international waters after departing Venezuela with a load of oil. U.S. Southern Command and the Coast Guard intercepted the vessel in a coordinated pre-dawn raid. Unlike the two-week chase of the Bella One, this operation was swift and executed without incident, with U.S. personnel boarding via helicopter and returning control of the ship to American authorities. These tanker seizures were lawful, executed under U.S. court orders, and are part of a broader commitment to enforce sanctions and illegal oil trafficking laws. The crews will be processed under U.S. law, and these actions demonstrate that illicit networks cannot evade justice by sailing the world's oceans, said U.S. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
This morning, the Sophia, that in coordination with the Department of War, the Department of Homeland Security apprehended it. This is a stateless, sanctioned, dark fleet motor tanker, and this occurred without incident. This vessel was operating in international waters and conducting illicit activities in the Caribbean Sea. The U.S. Coast Guard is escorting the Sophia to the United States for final disposition. To answer your question, Kelly, directly.
She emphasized that both ships were operating in violation of sanctions, moving oil tied to prohibited networks, and that U.S. forces would continue to disrupt such flows.
This was through Operation Southern Spear. The Department of War is unwavering in its mission to crush illicit activity in the Western Hemisphere. And as the President has repeatedly stated, we're going to defend our homeland and restore security and strength across the Americas.
U.S. Southern Command are saying that the Sophia, which is a stateless, sanctioned dark fleet motor tanker, has been taken. They're saying in a pre-dawn action this morning, the Department of War, in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security, apprehended a stateless, sanctioned dark fleet motor tanker without incident. It is the MT Sophia, which was operating in international waters and conducting illicit activities in the Caribbean Sea. It is being escorted by the US Coast Guard to the US for final disposition. Sources have told the Reuters news agency that this vessel was a Panama-flagged supertanker, MT Sophia, which is apparently under sanctions, departed from Venezuelan waters in early January as part of a fleet of ships carrying Venezuelan oil to China.
The reactions were swift and sharply divided across the globe. Moscow condemned the U.S. seizure of the Marinera as illegal piracy, insisting the vessel was rightfully under Russian jurisdiction and demanding the humane treatment and repatriation of its crew. Beyond public statements, Russia also deployed naval assets, including a submarine and surface warships, to escort the Bella 1 after it was reflagged as the Marinera in an attempt to deter interception by U.S. forces. The Russian deployment reflected Moscow's strategic concern over Washington's broader sanctions enforcement and was noted by U.S. and Western media during the Atlantic pursuit before the tanker's eventual seizure. Despite diplomatic protests and reports of Russian naval escorts accompanying the tanker during its Atlantic transit, U.S. forces pressed ahead with the operation. In London, officials affirmed British support for the Atlantic operation, highlighting surveillance and logistical assistance, though the legal and diplomatic implications continued to be debated by international law experts. These twin seizures mark one of the most assertive uses of U.S. maritime enforcement in recent memory, a clear signal that Washington intends to push harder on sanction enforcement and control of strategic oil resources linked to Russia, Venezuela, and broader geopolitical adversaries. From the high seas to world capitals, this story is far from over. We'll continue tracking developments, including legal proceedings, diplomatic fallout, and implications for global energy markets. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dives like this.